Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Outside of the actual human need for survival to discern danger and things like that, I'm noticing that the longer this is dragging out, everyone needs to judge everyone. And then I'm watching that also arise in me, and I was wondering if you can speak about that. Just judging people, judging people's choices, judging people's judgment. I'm just noticing, feeling so much judgment.
Yeah. I just want to send this message first out to anybody who considers themselves to be in a non-dual tradition. When you have this kind of reaction to other people's behavior, some sort of way that you position yourself with respect to other people, they're not really saying anything about the other person. They're saying something about themselves. If they're kind of earnest about it, which progressive liberal people tend to be, or New Agey spiritual people tend to be very earnest about that kind of thing, right? And if you're in a non-dual tradition and you're in that circumstance, you really should think about that, how you've stepped out of the view of your tradition, how you have left it behind. Because everybody here is an aspect of God. Everybody here is God doing that, even the bad stuff. And see, this is what we don't like to have to face when we're in traditions that call themselves non-dual. We don't like to have to face the fact that we don't get to call anything evil or wrong in some absolute way. We can have our relative responses to things, but it can't really come at the expense of denigrating someone else. But we get pleasure out of doing that. So whenever we hear anybody disparaging, denigrating, waving a banner about how someone else isn't doing it right, 100% of the time, that kind of thing is about the person doing it. It's telling you what they want to say about themselves. And it's a mode of separation. So for instance, I can say that I would really love it if this planet didn't get totally decimated ecologically, and I can work to not have that happen. At the same time that I can understand that if it does decimate completely, that's just what happened, right? It's nobody's fault because there's nobody here but God. So I was actually joking around with somebody online who was talking about spiritual bypassing. And I said, in California, we need a special spiritual bypassing lane on the freeway. The spiritual bypassing fast lane. Anyway, it's always dangerous to say without qualification that we need to remember that everyone is God, because then some people take that as license to not pay attention to themselves and how they actually feel about things, and not to, they think it's an excuse to sort of just wave everyone off and be judgmental towards other people. Why are you so worried? Everything's God. So anything can be turned into a judgment. But those kinds of judgments, when they're earnest and you can just feel that they're some kind of self-positioning, don't have a place in non-dual traditions. And then if we're aware of those things happening, we also don't need to do anything about it, unless it's someone we feel we're in the right relationship with where we can say something. When we want to give feedback to people about them sort of stepping out of their tradition and say, hey, look, that person is doing something you don't like, but that doesn't make them bad. We have to choose our times when we want to do that. I always love to tell the story about Swami Shivananda, because this just exemplifies to me how we can just keep being ourselves and keep expressing our sweetness and generosity, even when other people aren't. Just because other people are judgmental doesn't really have to mean anything about how we behave. So Swami Shivananda, every year at the ashram in Rishikesh, they had a time of year, I don't really remember what the occasion was, but they would just give a whole bunch of stuff to the villagers roundabout, blankets and food and cooking utensils and things like that. And there was a thief who had stolen many times from the ashram. And it came this time of year when they were going to give everything away. And a bunch of sannyasins came to Swami Shivananda and said, I don't think you should give anything to that thief. He's just taken so much from us already. He doesn't deserve any more, blah, blah, blah. And Swami Shivananda just said very simply, thieving is what he does. Giving is what I do. And I think that's really the challenge for us. If we want to stay firmly in the view of our tradition and in the fruit of our practice, it's to understand that we can just keep giving no matter what anyone does. We have that option. And that's certainly something that I try to put into practice perfectly or imperfectly at different times. It's not easy, right? So I guess that's another thing to understand, is that it's really not that easy for people who thrive on making separations between themselves and others to just stop doing that. I mean, that's our central karma, right? Making separation. We have a longing. We have a very deep longing inside. And the big part of that longing is to just be living in a world full of devotees. I know that's my longing, right? I want to live in a world full of devotees. There's all kinds of very sincere longing we have. And then when we see people who might be our allies or might be on the same path we are, kind of not doing that, then it can affect us in the sense that we feel bad about it because we want company. I want company, on the path. So recognize that some of our feeling of sadness or disappointment in other people or difficulty dealing with other people's foibles is really an aspect of our own idealism and our own longing, and we should take responsibility for that. We can also remember that any way we see others or the world or the circumstances insufficient or somehow degraded or something like that, that is only evidence of how far we have to go to deeper realization. This is what's called bringing circumstances onto the path, or bringing your emotions onto the path. When we recognize that our relationship to things is communicating to us about what condition we're in. It's also part of being a responsible practitioner to see that our reactions to things, our relations to things are a part of our package, either karmic or free, but it's never really about the circumstance or the other person. It's always how we're experiencing it. And that's part of being a mature practitioner, to recognize that. That's how you bring circumstances onto the path. When you recognize that, hey, I have a feeling of attachment to Earth surviving, for instance. Even though if I were Ma, I would just laugh about that. She would say, what world? But in this kind of circumstance, I get to notice that I don't feel what world. I feel like, no, I want this world. So if I recognize that that is not some sort of feeling that is justified and righteous, it's actually a product of lack of full wisdom, that's called bringing it onto the path. And also being modest, recognizing that I'm probably going to feel that way for a while. But we do have Ma as a beacon and a teacher, those of us that relate to an Anandamayi Ma, so that at least we don't get stuck with the conviction that our way of relating to things and our concepts about things are somehow righteous. It gives us a little bit of wiggle room to understand that. A little sense of humor, too, because you have to have a sense of humor about yourself. Otherwise, you really can't survive the process of waking up.
I have a question about stinginess. I was thinking about it earlier this morning, just like in relation to myself and just wanting to be more overflowing.
Well, there's a few different reasons why people withhold their love or their support or their money when they have it or their voice. So one reason is fear of judgment, just keeping quiet or keeping in the background or holding back because you're afraid of judgment. And that's really prevalent in today's culture of we have to present a certain glossy face to everybody. The second reason is anger. So withholding is a form of passive aggression sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Withholding in a way that you know or you hope another person will notice and will feel hurt by. And that's an aspect of hell realm. Or it can be Titan realm too. Just like a way to control people by withholding is a thing that can happen. And then another reason why people aren't so generous is because you're afraid you don't have enough. You're operating on some model of scarcity. And in fact, maybe it's a hungry ghost thing and you want to feel that you don't have enough. Even when you have enough, you perpetuate the feeling of not having enough, because that's what it's all about, is maintaining that feeling. So then you get, super rich people who don't really use their money in any generous way. And it could be just greediness and they're just hell-bent on amassing as much as possible. Or it could be that no matter how much they have, they just feel that they don't have enough for some reason because they're perpetuating that feeling in themselves. So there's lots of different reasons why that can happen. But generosity is really one of the greatest pleasures of life. You discover that as you go along, when you relax more. It doesn't actually feel good to your whole body, energy, and mind to try to hurt people in any way, whether by withholding or some other way. It doesn't really feel good to not be yourself and relax and just say and do what feels natural to you. It doesn't feel good to withhold because you're afraid of what other people might think. And it certainly doesn't ultimately feel good to be in a perpetual condition where you're telling yourself that you don't have enough and you're on the verge of calamity of some sort. So none of those things ultimately really help your body, energy, and mind relax or feel healthy. And as we go along in practice, we begin to notice how the patterns that supported us at one time are no longer useful. So many of us who had difficult childhoods feel that we have to be very strong. And then later we discover that sort of display of imperviousness and strength is not really helping us. And we start to try to decrustify.
Shambhavi, can you talk about sweetness being the fundamental taste of reality and what that means?
It means that we're obsessed with sweets. Our obsession with eating sweet taste is directly related to that longing for tasting the goodness and sweetness of reality itself. Sweetness relates to the bounty of this reality and its compassion and mercy. I mean, it's not like if we licked the absolute, it would taste like a cupcake. But being immersed in that natural state, you feel the goodness and compassion of this reality on its fundamental level. And that just feels like sweet. That's what we're longing for, really, when we eat sweets. The preponderance of our diet is sweet. I mean, all starchy foods are sweet, have a big sweet component, as you know. And then we pile more sweet stuff on top of that. In the Indian tradition, there's the stories of the yugas, the Kali Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Satya Yuga. Satya is the yuga where more people are doing spiritual practice, where more people are really devoted to it, where gods are walking the earth and many beings are visible to human beings. And we're more in what I call the round world, where it's not just what you see is what you get. Only humans and a few animals and plants are here, where we have this conversation across realms and there's this incredible depth to everything and devotion is the rule of the day and all that kind of thing. And then when you kind of go through the yugas toward the yuga we're in, Kali Yuga, where there's the most separation, most experience of separation, where spiritual practices are more difficult for people to do, and very few people who have real contact with other beings, and the world has more experience of separation. So what Anandamayi, my guru, said about this is that all of these yugas are happening at the same time. Different people are in different conditions. You can see that from that interpretation, it isn't really about making everyone else different, because if you were more aware, more enlightened, I'll say, then you would already be in the Satya Yuga. And so you would be having that relationship with others where you didn't have those kind of complaints. So I'm not saying you should do that. Obviously, if I could do it, I would snap my finger and do it. I can't do that. We're just humbly stuck wherever we are, and we just go on from there. But it's just to say that we need to bring these feelings onto the path by taking responsibility for our own longing, recognizing that it's good. It's good to long, but you're not longing for a different time. You're not longing for a different circumstance, really. You're longing to be in a condition where you feel closer to God and you are able to feel universal love and compassion. It's not heaven. In this kind of tradition, it's said to be immature to say that you want to leave samsara behind and go to nirvana or something. Leave earth behind and go to Satyaloka, as if these things were actual places. I mean, the main teaching in this kind of tradition, Judgmental, is that samsara and nirvana are the same. They're ways of being in the world, ways of perceiving. And the issue is our mode of perception. Since I was a little girl, I just felt very viscerally the limitation in my perceptions. I didn't know anything about spirituality at all, but I had this visual concept that I used to express my experience, which was that there was a metal plate in the middle of my brain, and if I could just get it out, then I could perceive how everything actually was. And I had this very deep longing to perceive how things actually were, and I had this unshakable conviction that things were not as I was experiencing them. This conviction drove me kind of crazy. Like I just had such a longing to find out what's really happening here. And that's still what's driving me. So just try to recognize in yourself what you're longing for, and recognize then that whatever it is you're longing for is something that you're already carrying in you. You already have that capacity if some obscurations were removed.